Okay, video 2. Hey YouTube, just bought this Drill Doctor 750X. Let's talk about what it can do. So we're going to start with this knob over here. This is the material takeoff knob, MTO says it right there. If I turn it all the way counterclockwise, finally until it stops, that is the maximum amount of material you can take off a bit. The manual and videos say to turn this in 3 marks, and there's these little marks on the knob. So 1, 2, 3. And in my experimentation, going more or less 3 marks in is pretty ideal. I can't say that more is needed other than when you have a really bad bit that's been destroyed, and then you might want to grind off more material. But otherwise, that 3 marks in is pretty much dead on. All right. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take this chuck and you're going to put a bit in it, and then you're going to insert it in here. And then this is the alignment process. So you have these jaws and you have this little lever, and those grab the flutes across the edges of the flute, the narrowest point of the bit, not this way, not across its widest point, across its narrowest point. And they grab on those 2 jaws right there. The next thing is the indexing piece right here has got plus, minus, and 118. Now don't confuse this 118 with this 118 over here. This 118 over here is this angle on the bit crossed here. This 118 here is this angle where the cutting edge is. So how rakish is that cutting angle on the edge? So if you set it more towards minus, you get a more flat cutting angle. If you set it more towards the plus, you get a more angled cutting angle. Now basically what happens here is if you go more plus, you dig into your material more harshly, you get bigger chips out, you make a rougher hole. With like soft metals like aluminum, your bit is much more likely to bind and make a rough hole, gouge the metal much more. In wood, if you're like doing a finished hole, it's going to make a much rougher hole. But if you're trying to hog out like say a hole in a fence post for a lag bolt, well, you know, might as well just be as aggressive as ever because you don't really care. Going the other way, more towards the negative side, which means that your cutting angle is going to be flatter. Essentially, you don't get any effective result. 118 is pretty much the best angle. If you go flatter than that, all you're doing is barely skimming away at the material you're cutting at and just producing a lot of heat and not taking any material away. And actually, your bit stays cooler if you take material away. So going more towards the negative side, in my opinion, I've tried it, doesn't really produce any good results. So don't bother. 118 is pretty darn ideal. In fact, every bit that I've looked at all use 118 degree of attack on that cutting edge. It's pretty much the best there is. All right, so that's what that does. I always use the 118 because it works. All right, so the next feature up here in the front, this knob is a real pain in the neck. So this piece rotates. Now that is what creates this angle across here. So if I turn down here to 118, that's this bit. This bit right here is 135 degrees, and that's this mark right up here. And you can go a little bit further than, you know, a little bit more pointy than 118 and a little bit flatter than 135. According to the manual, I think it says 115 to 140. Quite frankly, I wouldn't bother with either one of those. If you go with a really sharp point, it's hard to get the bit indexed in the little jaws back here, so you can line it up to cut it. 118 is pretty much about all the better you can do. And if you go more than 135, well, your bit has got such a small angle on it that it barely cuts, and it wanders so much over the material that it's really hard to start the bit. So 118 or 135 is pretty much the best you're going to do. And quite frankly, since the spur cutter, which is over here on the side, which I'll get to in a second, sucks so badly, don't even use 135. All right, so that brings me to number 3, or the next thing rather. And that is this hole right here. So this chuck goes inside here, and then it's supposed to cut nice 2 sub flats on the bit. You flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. It's supposed to make a point like that. Instead, it makes a point like that. Pure crap. Not worth anything. All it does is narrow the flutes down and make them fragile so they'll snap off easy. Truly not worth having. So that is pretty much all the features of the Drill Doctor 750X.